mi gente? Welcome to another episode of the Wine Chisme podcast. And I'm so excited because I have my friend. I always would call her my political soul sister, Aurea Bolaños. How are you, Aurea?
I'm doing well, Jessica. I'm so happy to be back here in the pod with you. I literally looked it up. Our last episode was almost exactly 4 years ago to the day. And now I'm back, and so many things have happened, moving, family, and your channel has grown so much since those days. And it's just so exciting to be back with the Wine and Chisme, and back with you, my political soul sister.
Yes, I know so much has changed. First of all, congratulations on your engagement.
Thank you. Yeah.
You got engaged. I got engaged and married.
Oh, what's happened in
So
the past 4 years? It is crazy. I didn't
They
think
weren't
I'd be
even in
here.
our lives then. They weren't even in our lives then.
I know. Isn't that the part? I'm like, they've just missed the timeline by like 4 months or something. That's it.
It's so crazy. And then since then, you have moved. You're no longer in San Diego. You live in Denver. You're actually in Atlanta right now. And we'll get into all of those things and stuff. But I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe for some reason, I guess I thought it was less than 4 years, but no, I mean, I remember it being about that. So I can't believe it's already been that long since you've been on the podcast.
I know. Our first episode that we recorded together, the political chisme was about activating people to turn out to vote. It was about the 2020 election. It was about educating the listeners about the importance of turning out to vote, even though 2020 was an incredible, difficult year for all of us, right? The pandemic, businesses closing, people losing their jobs. There was so much going on just in those 12 months and a presidential election, right? So it was, and now here we are 4 years later, another presidential election to probably talk about. And let's not do this every other 4 years, though.
Girl, right? I know it's so crazy. Well, before we get into all of the chisme, I'm going to read your bio because I know it's changed. And then we get into the wine, then we get into the chisme. So, Aurea Bolaños Perea is a political scientist, storyteller, and reproductive justice advocate. She launched Guerreras in 2018 when she was starting her graduate studies in political science and was looking for a community to talk about Latinas in politics, abortion rights, while centering the voices of Latinas in the intersection of reproductive justice and policymaking. Because she didn't see such a space as it was, she had to create it. Girl, that's what we do, right? Since then, Guerreras Podcast has served as a space to discuss topics such as the Latine identity, reproductive justice, the power of the Latine vote and voice, and so much more. So, like I said, you are in Colorado. Actually, you're still working, so I'm assuming you don't have wine with you.
I don't have wine, but I have whiskey.
Well, there you go. The
Yeah.
vibe for our wedding was kind of like whiskey and wine.
Oh, I love that. The best of both worlds. And my partner is a big whiskey fan. So he actually got me this bottle called Red Line Whiskey Co. And he's like, I thought about you when I saw it. So it's like, oh, I'm like, well, now I have to drink it because it's my bottle.
That's right.
So here a little mix in the Wine and Chisme asterisk and whiskey.
Whiskey. Well, I'm having a 2019 Cabernet Sauvignon from Ondrama Cellars. They actually were supposed to come to the wedding, Miriam and her husband Juan, and then last minute they forgot that they actually had an event that was extending into the wedding day. So they weren't able to come, but they were so wonderful and sent me some wine and some of their sparkling wine and everything. So that's what I'm having. So salud.
Salud, salud, clink. Okay.
And it definitely is a cab day. I was like, oh, I need a good cab. So
yeah.
I'm going to go with that.
I love that.
Like I said, I'm so excited because it's been so long and you have been doing so much work. You moved to Denver for this new job and this new opportunity. And girl, you are just truly doing the work. You are all, and I've seen you in DC. I've seen you in, is Boulder the capital? What's the
No,
capital?
Denver.
Oh, it is
Denver
Denver.
is the
Okay,
capital.
it always seems like too easy when it's that. You know what I mean? Sometimes you're like, that's just too easy. It can't be that.
Yeah.
I've seen you at the Capitol in Colorado. I've seen you on Univision, Telemundo, like, all over the place talking about reproductive justice. And that is even now, that's something that we were kind of already talking about in 2020.
Yeah.
Now it's even more vital. The things that are
Hmm.
that need to be done, the things that we have to do. And sometimes it feels like our hands are tied. And that's why I was like, I need to talk to Aurea because this woman is doing the work and she can really, like, there's so many people and sometimes myself included, because there's so many things that are happening, not only in our country, but in the world, that you're just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. But I would like you to start with like what you're doing now, what your job is now, and how you're truly moving, pushing that movement forward.
Sure, of course. So, on my day job, I'm the strategic communications director at Color. Color is the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights. We are the only Latina-led reproductive justice organization in the state of Colorado and have been for over 25 years. And that's something that's really important to understand. When you were reading my bio of me looking for these places to belong, right? Like organizations like Color are very unique. They do not exist in every state. And Latinos, we live in every single state in the United States, right? But these organizations don't. So for them, for Color being a Colorado-based organization doing statewide work, right? The fact that it's a Latina-led reproductive justice organization is really, like I said, unique, but more than anything, it should be a guiding light for other organizations that are involved in reproductive rights. So just to define for your listeners, right, what's the difference, right? Reproductive rights movement is what we usually assume is like, abortion rights and access to birth control and, very much the women's march, if you want to picture an image in your head.
Mm.
Reproductive justice, the theory started and was launched in 1994 by this woman named Loretta Ross, who is the founder of Sister Song, a Black-led reproductive justice organization here in the state of Georgia. And the tenets, right, of the theory of reproductive justice include one, that every person should have the right to become a parent when and if they're ready. Two, that every person should be able to decide if they need to terminate a pregnancy, so to have an abortion, right? And in which terms to have that. Third, that every person should be able to raise their family in a safe and healthy community. And fourth, that we should be able to express our gender and sexual identity authentically, right? So when you look into those tenets and also how the theory started, it was started because people like us, Black and brown women, were facing obstacles very differently than white women, right? We have faced racism in the medical fields. We are not given access to abortion care the way that other groups are, right? Some of us, due to our documentation status, do not have access to state funds in order to have access to birth control, right? Or to have STI or cancer screenings or abortion care. So in Colorado, specifically Color, in 2021, they passed a law called the Reproductive Health Care Program that ensures that every person on Medicaid and regardless of documentation status has access to up to 12 months of birth control of their choosing. Okay. And that also includes a vasectomy, by the way. Vasectomy is
Oh,
also
wow.
birth control. Yeah. So, and also, we start thinking about the binaries, right? Of like who should have access to this? Everybody. Everybody should have access to the pill and the IUD and the patch, the birth control they're choosing, right? For 12
Yes.
months, regardless of documentation status. And then Color also led in passing this law that I was part of that team called the Reproductive Health Equity Act, which actually added into our Colorado legislature that abortion is protected. Just because Colorado is seen as this progressive, purple, blue leaning state doesn't mean that things are protected in our law, right? Because every election, things can change. You lose a seat in the House, you lose a seat in the Senate, and then we're seeing the attacks all over the country, right? Of what losing those elections might mean. And for me, and so much of the work that I do is about creating the power of that narrative, right? Of those stories. It's about when I'm at the Capitol or I'm meeting with people for the first time that want to learn about color, or they want to learn about the work that I do through Guerreras, right? And my advocacy. It's about that understanding that all of us live multi-issue lives, right? There's not just one single thing that affects our day-to-day life. Some people are single parents. Some people don't have a job. Some people don't have documentation status. Some may have a disability that doesn't allow them to have access to reproductive health care because of some weird law that's in their state statute, right? So as an organization, we're seeing those intersections and reading in between the lines, because the reproductive rights movement is fighting for just legality, right? Just protecting abortion or expanding access or expanding the work. But us, it's about equity and access, right? Equity and access, because something just protected and it's not accessible for a third of the community. Is there really a resource that's acceptable? No. There is so much in the work that I could obviously go into more detail of, but my job is to ensure that the message of our work is getting out there. And you mentioned some of my interviews with Telemundo Univision. Yeah, it is. I also get on interviews, right? In some channels that don't necessarily like having women like me get in there and saying aborto libre, aborto seguro, aborto para todos. And they're like, yeah, like chill, right? But Latinos care about access to abortion. They care about protecting the right to it. Now, I'm sure you and I know a lot of people that are like, well, I wouldn't have one, right? But I personally don't feel comfortable with it, but I don't want government interference in my bodily autonomy. And that's where you get them. You're like, exactly. You don't want government interference in what you do with your body, right? So,
and they're just assuming that's a healthy pregnancy, right? That they're wanting to terminate. There's so many, as we're seeing in Texas and Arizona and in like these states that are having after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and we're seeing all of these trigger laws going into all these states. Then now these women who were like, I would never have one or this or that. Now they're experiencing health issues and medically need one. And now they're like, well, now I can't access it. And
you're exactly. Because, and then you see some like Christian influencers that are like, I had a miscarriage and I had to go into the hospital to have like a emergency procedure. The emergency procedure was an abortion.
Yeah.
They're just not calling it that, right? And it's like, yeah, but it's just more than people that choose to not become parents. It's about also, like you said, like your life is at risk, right? And for some people, when, like, for example, you want to be able to have a family and create a family when you're ready, and you start going to doctors, and then you start realizing that maybe you are susceptible to diabetes, right? Or preeclampsia, or that you'll have infertility issues. That means that you need to have access to reproductive health care resources and doctors, and also not be scared if you having these conversations is going to land you in jail, like it lands you in jail in some states. So we are seeing so many of the groups that are most disproportionately impacted by abortion bans and criminalizations are Latinas. The moment Roe v. Wade got overturned, 5.7 million of us lost the right almost fully or partially. 5.7 million in just June of 2022. Exactly. And we're feeling still those waves till this moment.
I'm going to share something that I haven't fully been prepared to share, but it goes into reproductive health care. I have not ever had to be in that position where I've had to make that decision for myself. But I have been put in the position where like I do have a family history of fibroids and this and that. And literally I started in my 20s trying to talk to the doctor and saying, hey, like I have this family history of fibroids, of women in my family having hysterectomies and this and that. And they're like, well, because I wasn't trying to have kids, they're like, oh, well, you're young and you're healthy. Once you want to have kids, then we can look at this stuff. Then we can look at this stuff, right? So I've had, and I think me and you have talked about this. Maybe I've had really heavy cycles, really painful cycles where, I mean, starting in high school, my mom would let me stay home like one day a month because my cramps were so bad. I was in so much pain. And then I don't know if you know, but in December, I ended up in the hospital for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an infection that just like went up and it went into my fallopian tubes and caused tissue and I like all of these things. Well, anyways, since then I've had to go to the doctors for follow-ups, and then they've been finding all of these other things. Aurea, I just found out, like officially found out. I knew I had only officially found out that I had fibroids when I like 6 years ago, even though I knew I had fibroids because no doctor was ever testing me for them.
Mm.
I only, and then I had to get an MRI. I had to get all the dye stuff. I literally just found out that I also have endometriosis. I also have what they call, I have these other things that have basically caused an enlarged uterus, which is attached to my bladder.
Yeah.
And it's attached to my intestines. And like, because I was like, you know what, let me just get a hysterectomy. Let me just get this done. Let me just take this out because I was so dumb. But that's going to make all of this other things harder.
Yeah.
And so now I have to like take this shot that's supposed to mimic menopause because they have to get my oh sorry
Done.
my estrogen levels low to hopefully help with it because I have scar tissue that's like it's going to be a super complicated procedure, basically, is what the doctor has said. A super complicated surgery because of all these things. And that is reproductive care. And
Yeah.
and I was in Texas in my 20s and nobody ever listened to me. Nobody ever
Yeah.
listened to me. And even if I had women OBGYNs, and I will say
Mm-hmm.
for the first time, I felt listened to. And my friend who's Latina, who's now one of the like directors of county health in Dallas, which I'm so excited for because I'm like, yes, we need you in this position so bad. But she's also OBGYN, and she was like, girl, you need to just force it. Tell them, you know. And but every time I did, I just felt like I was never taken seriously. It wasn't until I had to
Yeah.
go to the hospital at 46.
Yeah.
And finally, I had an OBGYN who's a gay man
Mm.
who finally was like, I could see why you want this. Okay, yeah, I could
Yeah.
see this. And now I got referred out. Now my OBGYN is a Latino. Because I used to
Mm.
be like, I wanted to see women, but I realized it wasn't, I was still seeing white women as my
Yes.
OBGYNs. And they never took me seriously. And I
Mm-hmm.
know some people might listen to this and be like, but honestly, I didn't get heard until I had a gay OBGYN and now an OBGYN who's Latino. I don't give a shit anymore about the sex of them. I need somebody who's going to listen to me, and who's going to listen to me, people that come from other underrepresented communities.
That, first of all, thank you for sharing your story, Jessica. I know it's been so hard because I've also seen, when you update us on your progress, when you were in the doctors in the hospital for so long too, without knowing what was wrong. Sharing your story also allows other people to not feel so alone. right, in their process, in maybe switching doctors, right? Because that is so true. We experience this um, sense of distrust from medical professionals who think that we are not like we're not telling the truth, right? And I was just reading a report that most pain medication is tested on men, not women, right? So because we also have a different pain threshold. So when people say, "Oh, I just take a Tylenol," well, all those trials mostly included men,
Yeah.
right? Or when we're talking about going to the doctor on OBGYN and getting getting tested, like for me, I also have endometriosis, but I also have PMDD, right? Premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So like my hormones just rig up and down days before, weeks before my cycle. And it's been a really difficult journey to navigate, even as somebody that works in reproductive health and reproductive justice, when you still have to go to a doctor and be like, no, but I feel so sick and this shouldn't be normal in the way that, I know my body, you don't, right? Like,
Mm.
this is what I'm feeling. This is the change I'm requesting. And imagine, we have a lot of privilege with either our language, right? Vocabulary, being able to like researching it, right? Being like, no, I have a feeling it might be this, and other people don't,
And
right?
I
They don't
have
have
an
access.
extra privilege because my sister is a nurse practitioner and her boyfriend is an ICU doctor. And I have
Mm,
friends who are OBGYN, like who I have a lot of physician friends who
yeah.
literally my friend Sandra, who I was literally screenshotting like her and my friend Gisela, who's also a doctor, of
Hmm.
my tests, like showing them. So many people don't have that access. I'm like, this is what's
No.
happening here, like, so you guys know what's going on and you could tell me. And I didn't realize like how close to death I was when I went to the hospital. I 2 days before was at an event, no problem. I was having the next day I couldn't walk. And when they were like, how did you, or I could walk, I was in pain. 2 days later I couldn't walk. And when I went into the ER, they were
Yeah.
just like, are you kidding me? Like, they were like, this is so bad. I mean,
Yeah.
I ended up having sepsis. And
Oh my God.
they they were just like, you weren't in pain? And I was like, no, I was fine. And it's because I've been in pain for you're right, with the pain threshold, right? Like you've seen those things where the guys like
They
with
put
the
the cramp
cramps. Yeah.
simulator. Yeah.
Oh, we have like one of those electrode things. And Antonio, my husband, so weird, still weird to say, husband, he'll put it on me and it'll be all the way on. And I'm like, and he's like, you don't feel that? He's like at 3 or 4, and he's like, this hurts so bad. And it's all the way for me. And I'm like, like, okay, I'm starting to feel it.
Yeah. I mean, I've suffered from very painful free periods most of my life, right? Since I started menstruating. And it took me going to a doctor. I mean, like a new OBGYN in Denver, and being like, hey, listen, the way that I'm feeling is not normal, right? The days before my period, the pain that I struggle with. I was also in hormonal medications for my thyroid, and I was like, should I stop taking this? And I had to really push to get myself like admitted to like get a full revision, in which they said like, listen, sounds like you have endometriosis. We suggest this different regimen. Your birth control, I know you're like, I'm in the copper IUD, right? Because I have very sensitive hormones. This is the one form of birth control that does not have hormones involved. And it is the most painful one, actually.
Yeah.
IUD insertions are one of the most painful procedures that people with uteruses can like be in,
And
right?
they don't give you
It
pain medication.
and they don't give you pain medication. It was in an article from the Washington Post that got released earlier this week. They shared that they asked 500 people that had gotten an IUD insertion what their experience was like, and over 80% of them said the pain was unbearable. right? And some of them said like, well, I have painful periods, so I guess the pain didn't feel that bad, but it was still like a 9 out of 10. And I was like, a 9 out of 10 when you have endometriosis, so you have like reproductive health care like issues, like that's pretty freaking bad, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
No,
yeah,
I mean, no, I agree. I had to, with going through all of these things, I had to get an endometrial biopsy. And I've had one
yeah,
before. They're literally, if you don't know what that is, they're literally like snipping a part of you, like of
yeah,
your endometrial lining out of you. And I think that because, and I was literally like, but my um cervix wouldn't open.
yeah.
So they're trying. I had to get it. I think they tried at least 3 or 4 times to do it. I had to have different uh and
Yeah.
finally the last time that it got done was at this most recent OBGYN, and they had to bring my cervix again, still wouldn't open. They had to bring a sonogram machine in, or ultrasound machine in, so they could see, and a specialist had to come into the room
Yeah.
to help guide the doctor to get like, in order to get enough. And I was like, I mean, it wasn't, I was in more pain when I was in the hospital.
Yeah.
So, but it still was not comfortable. And they were just like shocked that I was not like crying. They were just like, oh my gosh. And I go, this is the good and bad thing about having a high pain tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
good because this is not as bad as it probably should be for me, but it's bad
Mm-hmm.
because that's what led me going to the hospital, because I couldn't feel anything until it was like almost too late. And I wish
And
people would understand, like, this whole thing is reproductive care.
mm-hmm.
Like,
The
I'm
whole
not trying
thing.
to have kids. I'm not trying to not, you know what I mean? It's not, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
trying. It's literally about my health and about life and death at this point.
That I feel like that, put it on a billboard, put it on a slogan. That is the full entity of reproductive healthcare, which is, unfortunately, that in the previous decades, the argument has really been like solidified as like you're either for or against abortion. That's reproductive healthcare, right? That's
Mhm.
the issue of reproductive healthcare. That it is, it isn't. It is these 12 bullet points: infertility, endometriosis, pregnancy, sepsis, like all these issues. That is actually the full gamut of reproductive healthcare and access. Because at the other point, right, like the money, the time spent from going from doctors to doctors, getting the biopsy, it's surgical, right? Like, do you have time to take, like, from work, right? Do you have children that maybe have to go to school? You're a single parent, like that's why reproductive justice as the lens to look at reproductive healthcare needs and issues is so critical. Because other people are like, hey, we're just going to ensure that you can see a doctor. And it's like, well, I want to see the doctor and make sure that I don't get like hours or money deducted from my pay because I have to go see you, right? I also want to make sure that I put food on the table for my children. Is there childcare at this hospital that I'm going to go to? Is there a translator? Maybe. Because I also think about the fact of like, well, I don't know about you, but for me, like, we grew up as translators for our family, right? What happens if you don't speak the language your doctor speaks, right? And they're asking you these very important questions about your care, and you're just kind of looking at a 6-year-old like, well, say, o sea, dile esto, doctor. And you're like, well, what do I know what a biopsy is translated into,
Yeah.
right? Um, so much of the work, right, of having these discussions, of sharing our stories, is also so people understand that it's not the topic of reproductive justice, reproductive health care, abortion is not something to be ashamed of. It's not something for just women to discuss, right? It is about your husband, right? Knowing exactly what's going on with you so he can advocate for you at the hospital with doctors, so he knows what's in your best interest. It's for my partner and I who plan on having children, but I have to get tested for infertility, right? And knowing that it's going to be a really hard process for us to get pregnant. And so, what are our options, right? It also means supporting people in our community that don't want to be parents, right? And that means them, that's just supporting them that way, right? And that's so much of the shame and the stigma that also Latinos carry around this topic, right? Because we were taught that abortion is taboo and abortion only happens to certain kind of people. And, I'm not going to repeat those like very nasty, stories and narratives that get posed. But I mean, I know when I learned about somebody's abortion, it was without their consent. Somebody around my tías were talking about it, and they were saying, no, pues es que ya sabes, like she shouldn't have, and like gotten into that situation. I know a really good doctor. She could have gone all this way over there. And, that's what she gets for not being careful. I've always had to be careful. And I was like, why are you shaming her? Right? She already had 2 children. She didn't want to have a third. And you're talking about her as if she's the one at fault, right? Like she's not at fault. And just that memory has stayed with me for so long, because I imagine to myself, this is how we get primed to not be compassionate about another person's story, to not be compassionate about other person's needs, and always be the us versus them. Like it's either for or against it. You can't be in the middle. You can't be okay with it. You have to take a position. You're red or you're blue, right? It's reproductive healthcare doesn't have a party, right? Reproductive healthcare doesn't just live with just one group of people. It is a conversation that includes all of us. And then again, we look at the 2024 election, we look at what's happening across other states, Florida, Texas, Mississippi, and
Arizona.
Arizona, right? With the
thankfully
1864 law. Let me tell you where I was when that news broke. I was at a conference with some of my colleagues and other people that work in abortion rights movements. And we were with folks from Arizona there. And all of us getting our click, 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 all the news notifications of what had happened. And I'm looking at my team like, am I reading this correctly? This is 1864, as in the second year of the United States being in a civil war. That 1864, yeah, that one, where Arizona wasn't even a state. And you look at the folks from Arizona, just the color draining from their skin of, hey, we have to leave this conference. We need to go back, right? And it took votes, sessions and sessions of votes in the legislature in Arizona to repeal the 1864 ban. But in that time, what people think is like, it wasn't that long. It was just like 4 weeks. It was 4 weeks that people couldn't access care. It was 4 weeks that Arizonans had to travel somewhere else for care. That's 4 weeks is a long time, right?
Well, yeah, especially when you're thinking of it in that way. I mean, in any way, right? Whether it is to access an abortion, or whether it is to, like, in my case, somebody could have said, I'm trying to whatever, because I'm trying, like, at this point, again, working towards getting a hysterectomy. And they could say, well, you're having like a preemptive abortion, right? Like, that's how crazy some of these laws have gotten, that I'm not pregnant. I've not ever been pregnant. This is literally at the point I've been dealing with this for pretty much my entire life. And it's, girl, I bled through my wedding dress. No joke.
You would be on your, I don't mean to laugh at it, but you would be.
Well, check this out. My doctor had given me some pills that was supposed to stop all bleeding, so I wouldn't. And he's like, let me give you these. I forget what they're called. Let me give you these. And that was the worst day. That was the worst day. Every like 10, 15 minutes, I'd have to grab my sister. I probably missed almost half of my reception because I was in the restroom. And even my sister was like, oh my gosh, this is like, it was probably one of the worst days of my period that I've ever had in my entire life. And it was on my wedding day. And Jessica. I was just like, and women, we could feel it. You know? Guys don't get that. Guys don't understand. Like,
they're like, how do you know? And I'm like,
you know when, look, mostly women listen to this, but if you're a man, like, just bear, you're going to just hear this. When you have a clot. You know when you have a gush. like, when it starts, you just,
Yeah.
there's no way to even explain it. If you've
Yeah.
never experienced, you'll never know it.
Yeah.
When you know. And and if
No,
right?
yeah.
But it affects your everyday life. It affects my
Mhm.
everyday life. I literally bleed 3 out of 4 weeks of the month in some capacity. And who wants to live like that? Right? Like, who wants to plan their sexy time of, oh babe, guess what? I'm not bleeding right now.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah. Let's
Yeah,
do it right now.
yeah,
Yeah.
because this might be the only day, because who
Yeah.
knows? Tomorrow I might start bleeding again. Like, you just never know. And
Yeah.
nobody wants to live their life like that. And like I think you hit the nail on the head when you're saying, like, it's become this the us versus them. And like, reproductive rights has been boiled down to like pro-life, pro-choice, and that's it. When it's so much more.
Hmm.
What do we do at the, like, how, what do we, I mean, I'm fortunate. I live in California.
Yeah.
Now it's in our constitution, like,
Yeah.
that, it codified in our constitution of having access to abortion rights, but that doesn't mean all women's health care. It just is abortion, I believe.
Yeah. And what can people do? I feel like if you're somebody that can vote in these elections, either in your state primary, a lot of states have primaries in June, but in the general election in November, there's a lot of ballot measures across the United States where organizations like Color and others are putting on the ballot protecting abortion on the state constitution, much like California did. Thankfully, y'all have a governor that's like, duh, makes sense. Let's just do this now, right? It was also, it's really important for people to understand how at the state level, which is still quite local, right? Propositions like ballot measures. So when you look at your ballot and it says vote yes on Prop 1 and vote no on Prop 19, those are really critical. They actually have impacts for generations, right? It's not you just voting of like, I want more
And the
money in
most
the park.
immediate impact on you.
Yes, and the most immediate impact on you. So like don't look at those props and be like, I'm just not gonna answer these. I'm just gonna answer the stuff at the top, right? Props have a lot of impact on your day-to-day life. So one, if you're not registered to vote, go register to vote, right? Even if the only thing that you answer on your ballot is protecting abortion rights, do that. It's better than nothing, right? Support organizations that are on the ground working on these ballot measures or that are offering access to reproductive health care resources like birth control and cancer screenings and also abortions, right? Because these places are the first line of defense when we lose our rights, when we lose parts of our freedoms. Also, for the communities that can't vote, right, or cannot participate in elections, that doesn't mean that you cannot turn out with organizations to talk about what the importance of these issues. It doesn't mean you can't share your story with advocates and media about why it's so important to protect our reproductive freedoms. And if you're somebody that's like, I've never had an abortion, or, I'm not thinking about it, but I know that I have fertility issues, right? And I want to be able to have access to reproductive health care resources. Like to your point, Jessica, like abortion isn't the only thing at stake, right? While the ballot measures and the work that we're trying to ensure for November is about protecting abortion, that is just the first frontier. That's just one step, right? Because when they come for abortion, they also come for LGBTQ plus issues. They also come after immigrants. They also come after sexual ed, right? Where it's just, we're all on the chopping block. And if you decide to stay silent, you are complicit in us losing our rights. And, for so many people, because I know I'm in that group, right? You're like, girl, I'm tired. I'm tired of turning out to vote. Like my life depends on it. I am done. Like, how many times do I have to do it until I actually see some real change happen? And
As
I
many times as
feel,
it takes.
yes, yeah, as many times as it takes, but also know that you're not the only person experiencing this, and oppositions are counting on your dejection. They are counting on you being tired. And I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt to think I'm going to sit this one out. And so advocacy looks very differently. Voting and being engaged in local elections is just a third of it, right? Most of the work to make the change you want to see in your communities is about having these kinds of conversations. It's about being involved in local orgs or donating to those orgs, because every single cent counts. When I tell you that now working in nonprofit for so long, I see how much we can stretch $5, right? How much we have to stretch $5 because we're a nonprofit organization. It really goes a long way. And I, as a comms person, so much of my work is to understand what the other person is thinking, how the other person reacts to the news, how they react to stories, and to just give them a piece of what I know. It's not about convincing people, like at the end of a discussion with me, to be, all about abortion rights and abortion access. It would be fantastic if they were, right? But for my job is to be like, hey, here's all the resources and the facts for you to make the best decision for yourself. Whatever you do, you just at least had all the resources available for you to make that decision and make that opinion, right? And that way also protect my peace. I protect my peace when I do that.
I want to kind of go back because you were talking, I know we've talked about you being on Univision and Telemundo, and obviously over the last like year or so, Univision has kind of started leaning a particular way, right? It's not, when was the last time you were on Univision, and when, like, how do you get past that when when it seems to be like a place of news is becoming biased? Like, it's, obviously you expect that on watching Fox or OAN or one of these things, but with so many, especially older Latinos, first gen Latinos, like immigrants, that's where they're getting their news from. How do you approach that, knowing that where they're skewing, or have they tried to get you to speak a certain way? Have they let you speak freely? How has that experience been for you in regards to that? You probably have to be careful of what you say in regards to that, but yeah. But I mean, I can imagine it would be frustrating because they may not be as, and then everything gets cut up into like, 2 minutes. You might have a 10-20 minute conversation with somebody, but then that gets boiled down to 2 minutes, and it might be you're actually talking about what the opposite side is saying, and then that's what they use.
Quite literally, that is the fight. And I know you've also worked in media, so you know exactly what it means when you interview somebody and you have this really great 10-minute conversation with a reporter, and then they use 60 seconds, and it was the point where you were stumbling on your words, and you were like, oh, give me a second, and that's what they decided to use as the soundbite, right? And listen, the last time I was on one of these channels was about 2 years ago, and they decided to put me in a live basically discussion with an anti-abortion advocate who's also Latina, right? And they were trying to basically have us duke it out on live TV and during prime time. And if it wasn't for me asking, like, hey, what are your questions, right? Will this be pre-recorded or is it going to be live? And I could tell they were kind of evading, right, or avoiding my questions. And I said, listen, I will not be part of this interview if I do not know what I'm walking into. And that's we found out that it was going to be a side by side, the pro-choice and the pro-life side. And they said, we have a invested interest in making sure we're showing both sides. And I'm like, okay, but if you're perpetuating harmful messaging, that's not doing a both sides reporting, right? Both sides reporting needs to be factual and have evidence. And so from that, I haven't been back in that channel. And since then, it's been really difficult because, like you said, right, it was last year that Univision shifts its approach to Trump and said, like, hey, we don't want to play partisan politics. Like, if he's one of the candidates that's winning, we're going to show it, right? Like, we're fine with his rhetoric, when so much of his rhetoric is anti-Latino, right? So much of it is anti-immigrant. And, you were asking me how are those relationships in those situations? It's unfortunate that they're not good, right? They are not good. And even though being a Latina, being part of a Latina-led organization, even having a podcast where I talk about these issues as well, much like in different capacities, like the fact that these channels have so much power over the public's perception and the public psychology about how they understand politics shouldn't be going unnoticed, right? Shouldn't go unchecked. And I'm not saying checking the First Amendment and freedom of speech and then being able to report on what they have to report, but they do have a responsibility to their audience, much like I have a responsibility as a comms director to ensure that the information that gets out there is accurate to ourselves and our brand. Univision has chosen that that's not really a priority of them, right? They are just going to show what they think is important. And, there's this really great book by Dr. Donald Kinder that's called News That Matters. And it talks about agenda setting and framing when it comes to the news, right? So you're setting your day-to-day newscasting, what are we going to talk about on this Wednesday? The issues are immigration and abortion and the presidential election. How you frame those stories is actually what has the most impact on viewership. If when you're talking about immigration, you're only showing images of ICE agents, right, detaining people at the border, and the ICE agents saying like, what are these people doing here? You are framing the issue of immigration as a negative one of like, again, to the us versus them, right? And you're prioritizing one person's point of view over the other. But when you talk, but if, for example, if media was really framing the issue, for example, of abortion, of like a reproductive healthcare issue, one in which people could lose their lives and they do not have access to it, and sharing stories, then the way that you frame the public's perception on that issue is so different than what you would be seeing in Univision if you saw me and this pro-lifer duking it out at 6 p.m. on live TV, right? So the power media has in today's age should be taken more into account, right? Because now, I don't even want to get into TikTok, right? TikTok as the new frontier of news for young people. And, now we could start even the discussion of, okay, as a young person or somebody that consumes media on the daily, right? I go to my articles and I follow news, like newsrooms, etc. But TikTok is unfiltered news, right? From the student encampments to the ways that people are having difficulty accessing care. That's literally you recording on your phone and you're like, that's real news, compared to this kind of like not even over dramatization. Some people call it theatrics of seeing stuff on TV news, right? Young people aren't connecting with TV news anymore. They're connecting with podcasts and they're connecting with TikTok. And I was like, okay, that's a huge electorate of also English and Spanish speaking people that are seeking news in non-traditional ways.
Yeah.
Right. And so, so much of my understanding now of news and the way of where we put information has had to shift in the past 3 years because of apps, because of the impacts that I've had and the experiences that I've had with traditional forms of media.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'll watch TikTok and I'll be like, damn, why are they not showing this? And then I will go on. But again, I do come from that era of fact checking, right? I don't just believe exactly what I see. I'm like, let me go research this. And some things I'm like, whatever. Right now, my feed is very about, and I don't watch Vanderpump Rules. I don't watch reality television. Like the only reality television I watch is either like Chopped or like HGTV. That's like my reality television. But so it's a full of this stuff. So that's even how I even know any of that, because I don't even watch it. But you do see like what's happening on campuses, right? What's happening on which is, it's inspiring and frustrating, right? Because it's like this throwback to the 60s of kids using their voice and saying, this is not right, this is not right.
Yeah.
And then the, you know, and then the establishment pushing back on that. It's like you're seeing that, but it's like, but what I'm trying, I feel like I have like 20 million things in my mind and trying to get it out. But like, where are you getting your information from that you're regurgitating? Like, is it
Yeah.
just stuff that you're seeing and then you're regurgitating that, or are you like truly researching what is happening? And this is just in general. I'm not talking about what's happening.
Yeah.
I'm just talking in general. Like, but are you really researching and saying, you know what, this is it? And are the places that you're researching reliable sources, or are they all coming from a left wing or right wing skew? Right? Like, those are the things that I feel like people don't pay attention to anymore. We just go to sources um that just solidify our own opinions already, and then we're like, see, I went to this. I'm like, yeah, but you got it from the Onion. Right? Like,
Right. And then you're like, you do realize that's a satire, right? Even though it
yes.
sounds kind of very accurate to what we're currently going through. And media literacy being something that we don't get taught until too late, right? Like, I didn't start learning about media literacy until I started college, really. Like, I was just watching TV as my main source of news as growing up. And then I started going to college, and you have to find articles and make sure there were peer reviewed sources and ensuring that what you were reading wasn't fake news, which by example, not by example, by the way, the deep fakes, the AI deep fakes that certain groups are doing to mess with the elections. So this is a great example of agenda setting and framing, right? The story of deep fakes and AI is really critical for people's understanding about what could happen during an election and what certain groups are trying to do to have an impact on the election results. Now, the idea that a certain country in Asia is creating these deep fakes and they are to blame, and with them comes TikTok, and with them comes other forms of apps. That's how the media frames the story, and that's the one thing that sticks to people's minds. They're like, well, it's China, right? Like, they are trying to control our elections. You're like, no, that's literally just because one group that is doing these acts is from China doesn't mean that also TikTok is that's what's going to impact the elections. And the deep fake AI group actually tried to do something in Arizona. So the Arizona like elections board just held a training about a week ago, and they started the training with a video, and the people are just like, oh cool, the guy is kind of talking to us about what this training is going to be about. And then after, they're like, the video you just watched was a deep fake created through AI. And they're like, what? And they're like, we're going to teach you the ways to like be able to point out if this is a deep fake AI created video about the elections.
That needs to be like on everybody, like everybody, that should be required for anybody that goes online now. That is what you need to know. This is how you spot a deep fake. I started, remember when that guy was doing all those Tom Cruise deep fakes? Because he kind of looks it,
Yes.
but then you're like, oh, crap. And
Mm-hmm.
then you see him in person and he's, but with the AI, holy crap, he looked exactly like him. And I was
Yeah.
just like, when he started coming out and doing that, I was like, and look, AI can be used for really good things. I do use it for the podcast for, for certain things and whatever, and so use it to help generate ideas and whatever. But all that other stuff, like, um, yeah, like I was just like, ooh, we had like, it's not something that we can regulate whose hands it goes into, right? Because
Yeah.
and that's the scary part, because then anybody can
Mm-hmm.
access it and anybody can do whatever they want, and then we can get these. Remember they did one like with Obama, they
Yeah.
did one to show what it would look like, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, and then people started posting it as if it was real.
Another impact of what being also chronically online means, right? A lot of people feel that what they see online must be true, right? And sometimes I spend a lot of time on TikTok, and sometimes you see these trending videos that are like, oh, things my partner does for me that are super cute, right? And it has like 300,000 likes. And I look at the profile picture and I'm like, something looks off from the profile picture and like also the user. So I click on it, and that's literally the only video that exists on that person's account.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this is kind of like a plant, right? It's in, and also the images look very distorted, like distorted in a way where even as somebody that's chronically online, you can tell there's something off with it. But again, in this day and age, it's only more critical for all of us to have a media literacy. And it doesn't mean you know how to like define agenda setting and narrative and, you know, communication strategies at the nitty gritty. It's just like having a common understanding about the like how the news can impact us in a day-to-day life, how to check if a place is actually having factual sources, and also to be careful, right? When you're reading the news and some of the words that they're using, you're like, oh, that just doesn't sit right. Like I don't actually feel this way about this topic or this issue. Yeah, it's because they're trying to like frame it in a way that's going to elicit an emotional response from you, that's going to make you act a certain kind of way. And so much of the way that we perceive our surroundings is because of media, right? It's not even in-person interactions anymore because the pandemic changed everything for us. It's how we perceive our realities on the screens, because that was our only form of social contact for about 10 months. So, you know, I know that there's definitely going to be more articles and more studies to come in for a lot of folks like ourselves that work in media, that are involved in media, to further understand our audiences and how to like push also our needs into communities that are only getting their information sometimes even from Facebook. And you're like, girl, girl, if I can't fight Meta myself.
No. So what I know, like I said, you're in Atlanta now. You've been to
Yes.
DC. Like, what is the next? Like, what are the things that you guys are working on now to prepare for this next chapter, next phase, or of what's coming? And obviously, we're in an election year as well, so that's probably a balance of really trying to get information out there.
Yes, so Color actually co-chairs the campaign known as Coloradans for Protecting Reproductive Freedom. We are trying to, well, not trying. Coloradans for Protecting Reproductive Freedom is a campaign to ensure that abortion is protected under our state constitution and to remove the 1984 Medicaid funding ban. So currently, while abortion is protected under state legislature, you cannot use state money nor state funds for abortion care. So that means that people that would that are usually on Medicare, 1/3 of Latinos in Colorado are in Medicare. A lot of people in our community have grown up in their lives in Medicare, and if you were in need of an abortion, you wouldn't be able to have one, right? You would need to find other sources. You need to pay it out of pocket. And for people like to understand, that's between $700 to $1,200 out of pocket to have an abortion, right? And that is if you have like, you know, medical procedure. Now, having the abortion pill, so Mifit and Miso, that would be a different cost, but on average, it's $1,200 at its highest. So by being co-chairs of the campaign, we are not only mobilizing Coloradans, but Color specifically is mobilizing Latinos. We know that one of the key issues that Latinos care about in Colorado is access to abortion and making sure that there's no government interference in our personal decisions about our body. We have the survey results. We know what our people care about, and that's what they've been talking about. So that is, you know, while I travel a lot to talk about what Color does, the work is in Colorado, and we know that a lot of people are looking at Colorado as a guiding light, right? And I am really proud of the fact that Color, as a reproductive justice organization, co-chairs this campaign, that we're very steadfast in our mission, but more than anything, that we've stayed grounded in the authenticity of what it means to be a Latina-led reproductive justice organization. So when people ask us like, but Latinos, do they really care? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And actually, even more so, it is a key mobilizing issue for them to turn out in 2024. And we're not just seeing that in Colorado, we're seeing that in the United States, that abortion will be a defining issue for Latino turnout this election. So
Well,
anybody.
I'm sorry, keep
Yeah.
going.
No.
No, I was saying like, and that's something that I think people were not expecting in in like red states, right? Like
Yeah.
Kentucky and Kansas, like all these states that I think it was Kansas actually. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
That they did not, when it goes on the ballot, it's actually usually not a voter approved to ban abortion, to ban like those types of things. And it's, I think it's so vital. This is why money, it's so frustrating that so much money is put into campaigns, because people don't end up knowing. They just, whoever they see, whoever becomes the familiar face is who I think they tend to
Yeah.
vote for, or maybe just not, right? But the fact that so many people, so many women, right? Because women were over 50% of the population in this country. We could
Hmm.
literally turn the tide, but there's so many women who tie their power to white men that they don't vote in favor of their, until it affects them personally. They don't
Yeah.
vote in favor of like what this could be, or like you said, like it's very much just about abortion, but it doesn't, it's not just about abortion. Like you said, that's the very
Hmm.
front line. It's about like other healthcare. It's about LGBTQ plus rights. It's about immigrant rights. It's about your daughter's rights. It's about your son's rights. It's about,
Yeah.
like you're just your child, your family. And it's to see how much representation is had by men who don't know anything about everything we go through, right? They
Mhm.
don't know, they don't feel that pain, they don't bleed that blood, they don't like, and not medically trained. And then they
Mm.
think that they know better than us. Obviously, this is kind of like the core of where these things come up from, right? But then you also have women who support that, who are aligning themselves with that and thinking that they're, you know, uh, holding up traditional family values. You're actually not. There, you're not holding up traditional family values. And if you think you're a Christian, guess what? It even says in the Bible, in if it's the life of the mother or the child, you choose the mother. It even
Mm.
says that in the Bible. Plus, there's other
Yeah.
things that are added that people just men have added themselves that never was in the original text, but that's for another conversation.
I feel like you bring up such good points of like the way in which also like women, just to put in those terms, like choose to compare themselves to. It's not just to white men, it's also to white women, right? As if you feel like they are the epitome of what it means to be free. It's privilege, right? And if you cannot aspire to be the like a white woman and to have access to white women, because that's not actually the root of the problem, the patriarchy, economic injustice, racism, right? Like you start like those are at the core, right? And so much of our I know for me, being an immigrant and growing up here and trying to assimilate into the American culture was about anglicizing my name and changing the way that I dressed and changing my friends and thinking that I had to become somebody else. But that was the socio-political like culture, right? Of like aspiring to be what's the status quo. When it really, we're the United States, half of it was Mexico, half of it was ours, right? And it's not, Mexicans are also not the only Latinos that live in the United States. I feel like also as the like people that are Mexican, we also perpetuate a lot of that monolith, right? Where it's like it's our needs before anybody else's, right? It's our needs because we've been here the longest, or the immigrant rhetoric of like, which immigrants get rights first. Like when we are perpetuating the same stigma, the same hate, we're no better,
Yeah.
right? So that is also to
The
understand
anti-blackness,
the
the anti-indigenous, the anti, like
yeah,
there's no room for that. There's not. Like
no,
that's what is so frustrating sometimes when I see it, even if I see it in my own family,
mhm,
right? And I'm just like, I can't, I'm like, I can't have to remove myself from that, because I cannot. like, if that's who you want to be, like, I can't stop you
Yeah.
from being that, but I can stop myself from having to see these things or having to like perpetuate any of these things. It's our job to break those barriers, right? It's our job to go beyond that and say that's not acceptable anymore, because if we don't, nobody else will. Right? If we don't, like, we have to make it easier for everybody else, just like other people have made it easier for us. We have to make it easier for the next generation so they don't have to suffer the things that maybe we have and previous generations have and everything like that. So yeah, we
Yeah.
have to, we can't perpetuate those things within our community. If I hear somebody say certain things, girl, I have gotten into, I think me and you've talked to, I've gotten a straight out
Yeah.
arguments with my mom for stupid
Yeah.
stuff that has come out of her mouth. And I was like, no, ma'am,
Mm-hmm.
that's, I've got straight up arguments with her because I'm like,
Mm.
no, if nobody else, if my sisters don't say anything, I mean, I don't know if they do when I'm not there, but but I will. I have no problem saying it. And if I have no problem saying it to my family, I promise I will have no problem saying it to anybody else.
Oh man, it's so true. And that's why I feel like it's even not that turning out to vote isn't important, but having these conversations. And I know they're hard. And I'm not saying, go start a fight with your mom and with your sibling,
Yeah,
right?
that's
But
it.
uh but if you're somebody that you're like, no, I feel so passionate about this topic, and if it's environmental justice, if it's economic justice, housing, student activism, but you feel passionate so much so that it guides your moral like values, it guides the way that you perceive the world, that you perceive politics, it is an important enough conversation to have. And sometimes some relationships have to end because you do not grow if somebody else is holding you back. You do not grow if your values do not align even with your own family. It just is what it is. Like it that is the reality. And some people are like, well, I just rather not start those kind of fights. It's really and it's you're the only one holding you back from your own freedoms, your own liberation, your own way of thinking. Um, and I really implore people that are listening to like sit with themselves and understand what are the issues that are really like critical for their well-being. It doesn't even have to be many. It can just be one. And like put effort into that issue. Put effort into ensuring that you're leaving the next generation better than how we found it, because I can't I can't like conceive right now the fact that I have less rights than women in the 70s. Like, how is it that I have less rights now? It's 2024, right? Like we have a female vice president. Like how is that the reality? But it is.
Girl, when I was born, that I was born in 77. Yes, I'm totally aging myself. Um, I think it was just a few years before I was born when women had
Yeah.
the right to get a credit card without their husband's permission.
Yeah, can you imagine? It's like it's in the past century where
Yeah.
women have just
Half.
gotten the
I'm
right.
only 46. This is only like
Yeah.
that's crazy. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
we think of things like it feels like it's so long ago, but then you think of somebody like, you know, um Riri Bridges, right? You think
Mm.
her being the first Black girl going into an integrated school. She's only in her
Mm-hmm.
late 60s, I think. Late 60s.
Something around there, like or late, yeah,
Yeah,
something. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Like she's still relatively young.
Correct.
And like and I think we see these things and we think it was so long ago. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. And if we don't do anything, it's sliding back into that direction. And we cannot let it go, because here's the thing where I think, again, some women don't believe it will until it immediately affects them. Then they're like, oh, what? Oh my gosh, I didn't realize this could happen. I want to like punch him in the face, but but then you have,
Yep.
and then you have these other things, right? Where you have like people trying to take away rights from the LGBTQ community. You have people trying to take rights from the immigrant community. You have people trying to take rights from Latinos and the Black community and this and that. And it becomes a slippery slope. Once we start stripping these things away, you think, like Clarence Thomas said himself, that he would reverse like interracial marriages, and he's in an interracial marriage, that he would reverse that decision.
I know the way that it's so hypocritical to witness the people that are making laws, right? The people that are upholding.
Yeah, this is why it's so important to vote.
That is why it's so important to vote, or why it's so also important to know what's at stake, right? Just because you're not immediately impacted by a law or by a ballot measure doesn't mean that you won't be. Right? It doesn't mean that you won't mean. You brought such a good point. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, I got an ask from a reporter saying, how does the Latino community feel about the overturning of Roe v. Wade? Like, does this make them more likely to support abortion rights, like now that they've lost it? And I was like, hold up. Latinos have lived in a world where Roe was not meant for them, right? Like, most Latinos live in healthcare deserts. That means that there's not a hospital or a clinic nearby them in most of the places that our community lives. And then I said, what's currently happening is that a lot of white women are realizing what it means to live in a reality where they don't have access to things that were always deemed to them, without doubt, right? It is not us. We know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. We know what it's like to be on the chopping block, right? To be on the menu with policy making. But now you're getting a taste of what that looks like. Now you're scared, right? Because as long as it didn't happen to you, pay no mind to it. But there is no way of escaping that we are losing more and more freedoms each election. And unless we turn out, unless we pay attention, or we run for office, or get involved in advocacy organizations that are really at the front line of these fights, you're just going to be on the side of the oppressor, right? And when it comes down to it, you're also going to be on the menu. That's just what it is. And so I feel so, you've known me for many years, how passionate I am about people just knowing about what's happening locally. Just city council, the water board, the school board, doesn't matter, but pay attention to what's going on, because then you'll actually be more attuned into the health and well-being of your community, and that's really important.
And as somebody who used to be the director of communications for one of the council members for the city of San Diego, I will say this. Yes, oftentimes some of the council meetings are during the day, but there's at least once a week, they're in the evening time. You can watch them online, and if you don't catch it live, you can still, they are recorded. Most places are recorded, so you can still watch it because it's public information. And you can still, even if they always have time for public comment. You can see the agenda beforehand. And this is at least San Diego. I think it's most major cities, and I don't know about smaller cities, but you can see the agenda beforehand. They usually have agenda public comment and non-agenda public comment. So there's something that's not on the agenda, you can still call in. You can call in or be there and make your voice heard. If you can't be there, you can write to your council member. And they have people designated for certain communities that will most likely always get back to you, right? Yeah. They usually get back to you. I'll say that. So there are ways that you can reach out, even if you are young and you don't have access, but start figuring out, because that's what I think we so often forget. Like, the things that are passed locally, those are the things that are going to impact you first and foremost, right? That's going to impact, your streets getting slurry sealed. If a storm happens and one of the city's things gets into your thing, like, that's going to affect you. The sewer, the trash,
Well, actually, I'm just thinking about San Diego, right? One of our biggest events of the year is Comic-Con. And now
Yeah.
they're building an even bigger convention center and hotels nearby. And gentrification is an issue that has been impacting a lot of Black and Brown communities like Chicano Park and Barrio Logan. And the convention center, it's pushing a lot of people out of their homes
Yep.
because there's developers of hotels. And that means that if you cannot afford to stay in this area, which maybe you have lived for 30 years, right? Sorry, gotta go because it's more important for me for these tourists to come in and give us
Have an
more money for the
Airbnb.
city. And
Yeah.
exactly right. So it's about also having the right to have a home. And it's like that is so directly impacted to your day-to-day life, like having a roof over your head.
Yes.
So absolutely correct, right? The local politics is so important. Because I know that looking at national may be really overwhelming, but even just paying attention to what's happening to you in your city, in your county, that's a win. I like that's important for our own civic engagement, but also just empowerment and just know-how.
Yeah. And then sometimes that's not as overwhelming, right? If you
Yes.
start like, okay, you're like, okay, I don't know how to get involved. I don't know what to do. Start with one topic in your city or in your community. Start with one thing, like you were saying earlier. What impassions you the most? What is the thing
Mm-hmm.
that just like draws you in the most? And it might be something, and if it's in your city, like looking city or county, that's
Yeah.
a lot more uh you're able to wrap your hands around it a little bit more to start understanding it, so you can understand it at a larger level and on a regional, state, national level. So oh yeah, it's this, our time always flies by, and
I
we haven't
know.
spoken more than like social media recently. So
Yeah.
this was so good. So I wish, like, I'm just like, I wish we had another like 2 hours, because we could totally fill that time, no problem.
True. I know, but it's been so great to catch up with you and to be sharing this space again. I know our lives have changed a lot in the 4 years since we last like recorded together, but the values are still the same, right? We are both in the podcasting world because we care about empowering the Latina community. We care about sharing stories from people from all backgrounds of life. You have found something that you're very passionate about from sharing stories and wine, right? And I have found something that I'm also passionate about, sharing stories and talking about reproductive justice. And it just seems like such a beautiful full circle moment to be
Yeah.
able to see our growth, and for your listeners to be able to hear to the political chisme episode and then listen to us now and see how much we've changed. You're married, right?
Yeah.
You've won all these awards for the Wine and Chisme, and I'm just trying to keep up with you, girls. So
Oh,
congratulations on all your wins and the incredible hard work that you've achieved for
well,
this pod.
congratulations to you on the work that you're doing. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It is so unbelievably important. I'm so glad we had this chance and opportunity to talk again, because what you do is incredibly vital and incredibly important. And I need people to know like what a badass you are. So listen to Guerreras, follow her on social media, support Color, support any other organization in your area that is fighting for reproductive rights. And if you have questions, I'm sure Aurea wouldn't mind saying, yes, here's where you can go or whatever, or you know because she wants you to have the information. So,
Yes, thank you so much, and I can't wait to be back soon.
yes, until next time.
Hola, mi gente. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wine and Chisme podcast. If you would like to hear more wine and more chisme, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Saludos.